Hi everyone, welcome to the Property Finance Podcast, and today I want to talk through essentially the ins and outs of the application process. And the application process is going to be different every single time, depends what you do, whether it be bridging finance, buy-to-lets, development finance, commercial mortgages, whatever. The application process is going to be slightly different for each one. So kind of talk through each one in a little bit of detail and just give you an idea of what it is you need to prepare for essentially when raising finance. So the first one I'm going to talk through is kind of the buy-to-let side, because that kind of gives you the foundations of the application process for everything else. So when it comes to applying for buy-to-let mortgages, obviously the things you need to prepare, the usual things, bank statements, wage slips, a property portfolio, for example, you need to make sure you've got all of those things available. Maybe a copy of your latest credit file as well. Keep them all in a folder, G Drive or Dropbox files or whatever it is that you use. What I would suggest is updating those on a monthly basis. So every single month, have your bank statement that you update in there, have your wage slip that you update in there, have your credit file that you update in there. It just makes it really, really easy to then, if at any point you've got an application going through, you just send that link to broker or lender or whoever it is you're dealing with. And then all of a sudden they've got that, it's all ready to go. I'd also pop your ID in there as well. Worth keeping a utility bill from the last 3 months in there as well. So probably update it with every time you get an electricity bill or water bill or whatever, just popping it in there as well. Copies of your ID obviously are massively helpful as well. So getting those in there makes sense as well. Having all of that in one file just means you can ping it off to whoever you need. When it comes to a buy-to-let, you don't really need much else because the rest of it is done by huge amounts of paperwork. And I say huge amounts because when we talk through bridging and development finance, you realise that actually there's a lot more paperwork involved with a buy-to-let than there is a development loan, even though a buy-to-let is a significantly less risky investment. So it's always baffled me that there's way more paperwork with a buy-to-let than there is a development loan. What will happen, you'll go for your buy-to-let, you'll do an initial form normally, which then gets your agreement in principle. And then once you're happy with your agreement in principle, you'll then go and do a full application form, which may be 7-8 pages long, maybe longer, depending on the lender that you're dealing with. And you'll submit that along with all of the documents that we mentioned in the folder earlier as well. So getting all of those prepared obviously saves that application form process as well. Once you've done one of those application forms, it does make it a little bit easier moving forward because obviously you have all that information to hand anyway. And some brokers will have a pre-prepared application form. They'll basically send you an application form that kind of covers every single lender that they have on panel. And by filling that in, they can then just copy and paste the bits that they need. So it depends on the broker that you're using as to whether or not they've kind of got that to hand already. When you then move into bridging finance, this is where you'll notice a massive difference. So if you've been through buy-to-let mortgages, HMO mortgages, SA mortgages, commercial mortgages, all the same process, they all work in exactly the same way. But if you've been through that mortgage process before, you will find going for a bridging loan an absolute breeze. Because in order to get the agreement in principle, we don't need a form filling in at all. We don't need copies of bank statements. We don't need copies of wage slips. We don't need copies of credit files. We don't need copies of anything else. ID is probably the main thing that we're going to need when going for that initial bridging loan. So once you've done that, once you've got your agreement in principle from the bridging lender, which none of that is based off of you particularly, a lot of that is based off purely the property, which is why bridging finance and development finance are known as asset-based lending as opposed to yourself. So they are purely looking at the property, the deal, rather than anything else. So what will happen is once you've got that agreement in principle, once you're happy with it, then you'll get an application form. Some lenders don't do an application form, but most will have 1 or 2 pages that they want you to fill in, or they might have a little online application form that you need to fill in. Significantly less than what you need when it comes to a buy-to-let or an HMO mortgage. If you're servicing the interest, so that means paying it monthly, you may well find that the bridging lender wants copies of bank statements. The reason being is because they'll want to make sure that the income is there, disposable income, in order for you to then pay for the bridging loan on a monthly basis. So what will happen is they'll look through those bank statements, check what the income is, et cetera, and make sure that you can service. If the interest is retained or rolled, obviously they don't have to worry about income because all of that interest is taken off up front or added to the loan at the end. So they may not need to see bank statements. Some lenders will still ask for bank statements, but it depends on the lender. A lot of bridging lenders, similarly to buy-to-let lenders, will carry out their own credit searches. So you don't necessarily need to have a copy of your credit search there ready to go. Many of them will carry it out themselves. Wage slips, I don't think on any of the bridging loans that I've done or any of the development loans that I've done, I've ever been asked for a wage slip. So again, you shouldn't need to worry about that. I think on one bridging loan once, possibly I was asked to provide a copy of an SA 302. But again, that was where interest was being serviced on a monthly basis rather than retained or rolled. So we really don't have to supply a lot information-wise. So the application when it comes to a bridging loan is significantly simpler. You then move on to development finance, which to a degree is more complicated than a bridge, but maybe not as complicated as a buy-to-let. A buy-to-let I find to be more paperwork intensive. A development loan I find to be more information intensive. And what I mean by that is there's a lot more spreadsheets. You need to provide build cost breakdowns. You need to provide a Gantt chart showing, for example, your drawdown schedules. You need to provide CVs. You need to provide a breakdown of your GDV, for example, so your square foot, your price per property, etc. So what I tend to find with that is a lot of that information comes from other people. So although you have the effort of actually going out and getting that information from other people, you haven't really got to prepare it yourself. So that's what makes it slightly simpler than a buy-to-let. But what I would say is if you're looking at getting into developments, refurbs, that kind of thing, the information that you probably want to get ready is you want to have your build cost breakdown ready as quickly as possible. You want to have your developer CV ready as quickly as possible, and you want to have that ready before you go for finance. And the reason being is because you want to have that there in a file that you update as you do each project. You want to have, these are the projects that I've completed in the past. These are the trainings that I've done. These are the JVs that I've done. These are the properties I've invested in. And it doesn't have to just be investment property. It could be your own personal property as well. So if you've done your own personal property, if you've done extensions, building work on that as well, make sure that's in there as well. Similarly, with any buy-to-lets you've done, etc., get that on there. It doesn't just have to be development intensive. It can be other things as well. So get that CV prepared. So the other thing you need to prepare, whether you're doing buy-to-let, development finance, whatever it may be, is getting that property portfolio schedule updated constantly. So you want the property address, you want how much it's worth, what the mortgage is, who the mortgage is with, what the rental income is, what the mortgage payments are. Make it quite detailed. Any broker will have a template. I have a template that if any of you come to me and say, I need a template property portfolio schedule, absolutely. Which one do you want? I've got about 20. So I've got one that I can send to you pretty quickly and easily if anyone requires one. Make sure that's in a file, make sure that's being updated alongside your CV as well. Then once you've got your bill cost breakdown, once you've done your drawdown schedules, everything else, outside of that, there isn't really much that a development lender is going to be asking you for. When it comes to the actual application process, so we know what we need to prepare, we know what's going to be asked of us, but what is the actual process that we're going to go through? So for a buy-to-let, submit all your information, get the AIP, submit the application form. That application form then goes in. If the lenders are happy with it, you then go to valuation. Once you've gone to valuation, the process is the same as any other property deal. When it comes to a bridging loan, submit the information, get the agreement in principle. If you're happy with the agreement in principle, you then instruct the full application. If they're then happy at that point, you then instruct the valuation. You can also instruct the legals at the same point as the valuation as well. One thing to be really conscious of with bridging finance is when you submit a buy-to-let application, for example, the thing to keep in mind is that they will have had underwriters look over it, dealt with it, etc. They'll be pretty happy at that point. So when you kind of instruct the valuation, everything else, you've got that certainty of as long as nothing comes up in the valuation, you should be okay. When it comes to bridging finance, development finance, etc., even at the point where you've put the application in, even at the point where you've done the valuation or anything else, they can pull out at any point. So they don't necessarily have that certainty of funding that you would get with other things. So it's worth keeping in mind that actually when it comes to bridging and development finance, you are still at risk throughout the whole thing. And I think that a lot of people don't necessarily realize that, especially with development finance as well. There are lenders who we tend to steer clear of because I don't like the process. But there are lenders out there who potentially will get the valuation in, they'll get the legals done, they'll get everything done, then they'll go to the funding line for approval. The risk you've got there is you could literally get to the day of completion and that funding line can turn around and say, well, actually, we don't want to fund the deal anymore. And at that point, you sit there and go, well, hang on a minute, what am I meant to do now? You've taken me through this entire process and now you've turned around and said that you don't want to do it. So I think it's worth keeping that in mind as well, that you understand the application process with each individual lender, bridging, development, etc., because you need to know at what point you've hit that certainty of funding, because you need to know for your own peace of mind, right, okay, I know that this funding's okay. I know that I'm okay. So it's worth keeping that in mind. So we've spoken through the buy-to-let one, spoken through the bridging one. Development-wise, so obviously you submit the information, you then go get an AIP, agreement of principle, so they then come back and say, right, we'll lend you XYZ. You then submit your bill cost breakdown, GDV breakdown, drawdown breakdown, whatever else they've asked for. Then at that point, they'll instruct the valuation and also a quantity surveyor as well. So the valuation will check your GDV, will check your current value, and then what will happen is the QS will go out and they will check your bill costs, make sure that your bill costs are okay, and make sure that you can build for what you said you can. And also to make sure that if the lender repossesses, they can build for what you said you can as well. And that's really, really key with the QS, is that they're not looking for necessarily what you can build it for, but if the lender repossesses it, can they build it for the same set of figures? So on one that we're looking at the moment, we're obviously saying we can build at £120 a square foot. QS is saying, no, we think the minimum's £132 a square foot. So 10% difference. It all makes a difference to the end figures. So it's worth keeping that in mind, that the QS may move some of those figures around. Buy to let, you know pretty much what figures you're going to get. And if the valuation comes back, you know where you stand. Same with bridging finance. Development finance, there are a lot of moving parts. The valuation could change. The QS could come back with different numbers. So I think with development finance, go into it with an opinion that those numbers could change. There could be some shifting around of numbers, sometimes for the positive, most of the time potentially for the negative, where if the GDV comes down, obviously the lending amount comes down. If the bill costs go up, obviously the lending amount comes down. There's lots of different changes that potentially could come out of that. But hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea of the application process and how it is completely different to a degree for each and every product. But hopefully it's kind of given you a bit of peace of mind that actually bridging and development finance aren't actually all that bad from an application process. And buy-to-lets aren't that bad either. It's just a lot of paperwork, which is always good fun. But if you're prepared in the right way, actually that paperwork isn't the be-all and end-all. So yeah, hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea of how the application works. But if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to reach out. More than happy to talk through the application process in more detail. But that just leaves me to say, for those that are watching and listening, thank you very much. I'll catch you on the next one.